When Anakin Skywalker had his last 3 organic limbs severed by Obi-Wan and left to burn on the shores of Mustafar, he suffered horrific injuries that would inhibit him for the rest of his life. 5th-degree burns charred Lord Vader down his muscles and organ tissue, and only by the miracles of the dark side and magic, along with cybernetic technology, did he manage to survive this fateful experience. However, while the suit he wore indeed kept him alive, he was in constant agony while wearing it. While the soreness of his wounds may have subsided over time, the suit itself was a tremendous burden on the Dark Lord. We've recorded entire holocrons just about talking about all the terrible shortcomings of Darth Vader's cybernetics, from the hooks and wires snagging on his loose, vulnerable flesh, to the uncomfortable and outdated prosthetics that he was forced to wear. All of it was a true nightmare to live in day in day out. The only solace or relief Vader ever received was that from his Bacta tank. And while we would come to know this is a staple of Vader's spare time in the future, there were long stretches of time where he actually avoided his Bacta tank. So my friends, let's take another analysis into the psyche of Lord Vader and figure out why he would deny personal medical treatment during the first few years of his life in his suit. First though, it's important to establish what Bacta is and what it does. Bacta itself is a viscous substance that is considered by the wider galaxy to be something of a miracle drug. It was created sometime during the Old Republic or the High Republic, depending on whether we're talking of legends or canon. Either way, it was created by a species known as the Vertix. The drug was created by combining a type of barley called Vertaxia and 2 types of bacteria named Cavim and Alz, and then following this, mixed with Ambori fluid. This would create a thick and gelatinous fluid of clear and bluish color. Bacta could be applied in many different ways, whether through patches, injections, pills, or sprays. But the most common way to use Bacta, and most famous, was through the use of a Bacta tank for major injuries. The Bacta fluid would be given some DNA of the patient in order for it to be customized to the specific body. After that, the patient would be fitted with a breathing mask, often given sedatives, and then submerged in the fluid. Experiences with Bacta differ, with some finding the process very soothing, and others feeling as though they're being swallowed alive. Vader would actually be the former, enjoying the experience of being in a Bacta tank because he was able to be without his prosthetics, and it was the only time he described ever actually feeling human again. Many wondered why Bacta wasn't able to fully heal Vader's body, considering it had been able to heal most of the people with just about any injury, including full-on lightsaber wounds. The issue though is that while Bacta is considered to be a miracle drug, it has its limitations. It doesn't just heal or regrow limbs and bodies freely. The process that Bacta uses is through the bacteria we talked about earlier. The microbes, which are familiar with the genetic makeup of the patient, will go into the body and simply accelerate the healing and regrowth process. This happens so quickly that patients can often recover from near-fatal injuries in a matter of days or severe ones in weeks. In many cases, patients won't even have scars after the Bacta treatment. However, Vader's body was so thoroughly damaged that he would still have died. It was only by his own will and the will of the dark side of the Force that this burnt husk of a man survived at all. By all accounts, Vader should have died. Bacta accelerated the healing process which already exists in that process itself, but no tissue can be repaired if the tissue itself is completely dead, which is the case with Vader's lungs and many of his muscles and organs. The breathing apparatus connected to his chest forcefully pumped oxygen into his lungs because his lungs could not do it for themselves. And of course, Bacta cannot regenerate limbs either. Thinking about it in this context, Vader, using the Force, was literally hauling around a dead body by many respects. Having said all of this though, Vader did have a great amount of relief when he was within his tank, with the constant regenerative process of the Bacta liquid alleviating his physical pain. Vader mentioned that he actually felt human again when he's able to meditate in his Bacta tank on Coruscant or in his castle on Mustafar. It was in these moments that Vader would often think back to his past and ruminate on all of his regrets and his past life as Anakin. Unfortunately though, this is where the major problem occurs. Whenever his physical pain left him, it was replaced by the full force of his emotional suffering. The agonizing memories of his last days as Anakin Skywalker, the betrayal of Kenobi, the death of Padme, and his presumed loss of his child. Even the guilt of self-loathing of his own betrayal of the Jedi that he suppressed so much of the time. All of this would hound Vader's mind, bring him to the brink of insanity. Vader preferred to be depressed rather than insane, and he would openly refuse the use of his Bacta tank for a while because of this fact. His suit caused him great physical discomfort, but it was nothing compared to the emotional suffering he harbored within himself. He much preferred to suffer outside than inside. In Legends, this worked very well for Vader's journey as a Sith. But in canon, Sidious is actually angered by Vader's depression. He tells Vader that she should be allowing his anger to fester and grow into power for the dark side, but instead, Vader is wallowing in grief. By this notion, Sidious is effectively saying that grief is of no use to the Sith because it does not fuel the dark side, likely due to the fact that grief is in large part attributed to regret. Sith should not regret their actions or hate themselves, otherwise the dark side will not respond to them as strongly. Sidious encouraged Vader to forget Kenobi, to forget Padme, and to let it all go so that he could move on and grow. While this sounds like it would be counterintuitive for a Darksider, grief apparently stunts their ability to progress in canon. This actually happened in Legends also to Darth Bane, who, after learning that he had accidentally killed his abusive father with the Force, went into a deep depressive slump. His Force abilities not only stunted, but were actually weakened. It got to the point where he was nearly unable to manipulate small objects with telekinesis, or wield his lightsaber properly. Until Bane got his resolve back, he was a weakling because of his grief. But on the flip side, physical pain greatly enhances the power of the dark side within a Sith. They can draw upon that simple, tangible suffering, and use it to stoke the fire of their strength. Vader had an endless supply of physical pain from which to draw upon in his suit, and eventually he would get to the point where the emotional pain would leave him cold and callous in the place of where his heart used to be. But what's important to note is the steps that Vader took to avoid his Bacta tank on Coruscant specifically, rather embracing the tank on Mustafar. Coruscant and Mustafar meant two very different things to Anakin, and therefore to Vader. Mustafar, Vader found it easier to connect to his rage, his hatred for the Jedi, and his hatred for Kenobi. On Coruscant though, he was more reminded of his wife, as the halls of his grand castle on Coruscant were empty, and in Vader's mind, these grand halls that now belonged to the Sith Lord were filled with nothing but the ghosts of Anakin. This was the spot of his greatest suffering and grief emotionally, and because of this, he led more into the hatred that was fed to him by Mustafar. Instead, finding some peace in the Mustafar tank, while the one on Coruscant brought him only regret and sadness. Following this realization, Vader would be able to meditate on his tank on Mustafar, truly connecting with the dark side yet again, as Vader would say that in this frame of mind, the dark side was able to speak to him more freely, gaining insights through the Force that he was unable to gain while wearing the suit. But anyway, my friends, this is why Vader actually avoided the Bacta tank when he could, and through the first few years of him being a Dark Lord. Tell us, did it surprise you that the dark side is actually weakened by grief and depression in canon? And as another question, how do you think you would like the Bacta treatment for your own injuries? Would you embrace it? Or do you think it would be very, very strange? Let us know what you think about this in the comments down below. And as always, my friends, thank you for visiting the channel today, and may the Force be with you.